With the upcoming Maintenance Away update to Railroader, our previous save files will be incompatible. Therefore, the Railroad I've been running since the release date will soon make its final trips. I have played a total of 933 hours in this game, although about a third of this time was on other people's unmodded multiplayer servers. My own save was also completely vanilla, no mods were ever used. I know some people may be surprised and had gone over 600 hours without mods. Due to this, I have been wanting to go over my own personal railroad and explain how I organized it to keep myself interested over that whole time. From my experience in multiplayer, I find that most do not organize their railroads how I do. However, I think discussing my own railroad may help others with planning for their own, and I'll share my own thoughts on the upcoming changes with the update. I believe my opinion for the update may be different than most. The key aspect about my railroad is that I heavily restricted myself. I wanted to emphasize the short line operations part of the game, so in a way, I more or less role-played as a fairly poor short line. Just don't look at the top right of the screen and see what my actual funds are. I restricted myself to only 7 locomotives, and none of them were duplicates. I also had the locomotives light enough to run on a short line, meaning that the C-46, which was the historical locomotive class that ran on the Murphy branch, and a decapod were the 2 largest locomotives on the railroad. I also somewhat jokingly presented my railroad to be under the receivership for one of my friend's fictional railroads, as 2 of the locomotives and some of the owned equipment were in the receiver's lettering. Another thing that may surprise people is that my railroad only went to Alarka Junction. I think most solo players go all the way to Alarka proper. The reason why I didn't was to keep a whole day's worth of operations short. Still, it takes about 6 hours for me to complete a full day, which is typically split into 2 sessions. That being said, I did optimize the railroad around the 6-hour day, and there's hardly any time gaps where I'm not spotting cars or organizing and dispatching trains. The final major restriction I put on myself is I set the overhaul distance to only 1,000 miles. Part of this was due to the reduced overall length of my track, as well as a way to increase the upkeep costs. But the other thing is that I did not hire additional crews to accelerate repairs at the engine shops. This meant that when a locomotive needed an overhaul, it was out of service for 2 days. I had to plan around that. And yes, I did once have the worst case scenario where both my most powerful locomotives were in the shops, which meant we had to do some fun shenanigans with extras and double heading. Though, typically, there was only one locomotive being overhauled at any one time. Still, this meant I couldn't always use the same locomotive for the same trains every day, and motive power had to be transferred around. It helped to keep each day different and unique with new restrictions and limits. I ran my railroad on a timetable. It primarily centralized around the main passenger train, the Blue Ridge service, number 10 and 11. I'll admit my timetable looks a bit confusing, as instead of starting the train at the end of the railroad, it starts at Bryson and runs a fairly tight schedule to Silva, refuels at Dillsboro, before continuing westbound to Alarka Junction, then returning to Silva and ending the day back at Bryson. Essentially, the entire goal when I'm playing is to complete all the freight traffic before the Blue Ridge service completes its runs. I have a second passenger train, the Bryson Mixed Local, which handles the freight trains for Bryson, Ella, and non-sawmill cars for the interchange at Whittier. It's slower and with less strict schedule. Half the idea for it was that if I ever had somebody wanting to run a train in multiplayer, they could just run the mixed freight while I managed all the rest of the traffic and dispatching. The freight trains also loosely followed the timetable as well, but I was too lazy to fill it in. Coal drag started in Bryson, departing 10 to 15 minutes before the Blue Ridge service, and headed to Silver Interchange, dropping off the loaded cars before picking up the empties and heading to Robinson Gap. The train would then take the already loaded cars into Bryson to keep overnight. I don't think enough people realize it, but there isn't a penalty for keeping cars for the interchange overnight, as there's no time bonus for delivering to the interchange. This was a bit of a time saving, as I would have some mainline traffic moving while I was switching and sorting the interchange. The other freight train was based in Whittier and served the cars for the sawmill, Wilmot, and inputs for Whittier Industries. The only real dedicated switcher was at Dillsboro and Silva, which served the interchange, local industries, as well as the pulpwood at Barker's Creek. For the industries, all were at Tier 5, with the exception of Whittier Sawmill at Tier 4, Parsons Tannery at Tier 2, Silver Paperboard at Tier 3, and Silver Building Supply at Tier 3, because I forgot about it. The reason why the tannery and paperboard were so low was primarily to reduce the amount of pulpwood cars to haul. This also was to help reduce traffic on the Connolly Branch and East Whittier Yard. I also utilized Barker's Creek and even Hemingway to load up on pulpwood. And while yes, it is a major commodity on the historical Murphy Branch, I don't see historical images of massive unit trains of pulpwood racks that quickly became an eyesore in many multiplayer games. From this historical photo, you see that pulpwood racks were mixed in within the freight trains. I liked my scattered approach to retrieving pulpwood. It would sometimes make some interesting situations where I had need to run a following section or an extra train on my railroad. If I had to make a change on the industry demands, it's for historical nerd purposes, the tannery at Tier 3 and the paperboard at Tier 2, as the paperboard plant was to utilize the waste pulp from the tannery. I think this will also lighten the traffic load for silver itself slightly, as the tannery production was extremely low. At Tier 2, I think I only had to put in a boxcar and hide zero once every 20 days. I had no idea how the industry made any money. Robinson Gap coal mine I might reduce, as I didn't like dedicating an entire locomotive to it. However, this may change with the update, so this seems like the opportune time to segue to the next part of this video, how I expect to change my railroad for the update. The reason why I might not have to worry about dedicating road trains to industries is that this update is adding a third interchange to the game, somewhere around Almond. This is a feature that I am the most excited about for this update, hands down. Finally, I can experience multi-directional traffic without having to build all the way to Andrews, nor having to deal with red marble grade. This will make rail yards far more important, and more reasons to plan meets with trains. It also cuts down on the length of trains, as now only half the cars need to go to Silva, and the other half will go to Almond. It should diminish the meta of having overly long drag freights. I really don't want to undersell this. It's a big change to operations. I think most single-player people likely never got all the way to Andrews, and frankly, I don't recommend it unless you really like punishing yourself. That being said, in multiplayer games, I loved having the two interchanges, because sometimes you may have to have more tonnage going one direction or the other, which required a more adaptive approach to your operations. I'm beyond excited for it, and this is the best feature to make the game more dynamic. The second major part I'm excited for is the updated cargo weights. Before, all cargo loads were the worst case scenario, where all the cars being loaded up to the maximum possible load weight. Now, cargo volumes will be taken into account, and this should cause a dramatic decrease in the weight of loaded trains, probably most noticeably for the Whittier Sawmill dimensional lumber loads. This again will make smaller locomotives more effective and grades not as painful. Because of these changes, I think I can still manage my previous rule set where I had in my first career railroad to keep a busy short line feel without pushing me too much to over-optimize like a modern Class 1 railroad consumed by PSR. However, you may notice that this major update isn't called the Car Weights and Almond Interchange update, and well, yeah. I am somewhat wary of the actual maintenance away aspect. Not so much for my personal sake, but I'm afraid that it's going to burn out a lot of people, and is highly likely to be a feature that many people will disable. I like the concept of it, but I don't think a lot of people have really processed the dispatching aspect with the maintenance away trains. I think a lot of people at first will run the maintenance away trains after they finish delivering all the cars at the interchange at the end of the day. However, I think people forget how skipping time works. The locomotive does not move faster because of time acceleration. It will maintain that one section, and when you fast forward, you now have to sit a few real-life minutes for it to go to the next section, and then before you fast forward again, and again, and again. This isn't really viable for gameplay. What you will have to do is run the maintenance away train at the same time you're running the revenue traffic on the railroad. However, what this means is that there's going to be a slow and often stopped train that will be occupying the main line. Thus, this dispatcher is going to have to be closely monitoring the maintenance away train and bring it into a siding when another train needs to utilize the track. But then you have yet another problem, as now that siding can't be utilized for revenue traffic. Thus, for that day, that particular sighting will most likely be off limits for most trains. While I find this challenge interesting, I think for a lot of other people, it's going to be a difficult pill to swallow. People might try upgrading the track to Class 5 to avoid the maintenance, but it's actually not solving the conflict, instead just kicking the can down the road. You will eventually have to run that maintenance away train. You will have to schedule your revenue traffic around it. Otherwise, you'll have to have an entire or even multiple gameplay sessions of running the maintenance away train by itself in the middle of the night. Even in the official video, one of the people in it admits that he underestimated the maintenance away work, and the vast majority of players will also probably underestimate it. I know people don't like being told what to do, but I think players need to go ahead and get into the mindset of planning their operations with the maintenance away train early on, as demands in this game increase exponentially for every mile of track and industry added. All in all, I'm still looking forward to this update. I could go on for a couple hours on what I'd like to see next. Of anything, the main thing that needs an overhaul is, well, the overhaul system, or at least provide more places to repair passenger cars. This is the biggest crisis I've heard from multiple different sources. Also, I did have a lovely chat in person with Adam at the Southern Pride Gaming Expo 2 years ago. My goodness, has it really been 2 years? Anyway, I would love to meet up with Adam again and have another one. I'm sure there are plenty of insights we can share with each other. I still love the game after all this time, and I'm still looking forward to the future. And thank you for watching.